Good evening. Good evening. Everybody hear me good? Okay, buenas noches. My name is Miguel Fiol. I'm the troublemaker of this expedition, so you can blame it all on me or something. So thank you for coming tonight. I think you all sense, and we certainly had the idea that this was an urgent matter, what we saw out there, that we needed to report it as soon as possible. So literally we just got off the plane Tuesday and Monday, so we're still thinking about San Diego, the nice weather out there, and certainly Tijuana had a lot of green. So we're here in a very serious note to report what we feel is a very urgent problem out there, and looking at collaboration with the public about some actions, and we have some ideas. So first I want the people who went on the mission, the medical mission, to come and sit here, please. Roberto, Sarah, all the people in the first row. So let's give them a round of applause. So we're very pleased to be here tonight to share our experience with you about what we saw out there. I'm just going to give a real quick introduction, then we have our speakers give you their, and this is a different one. Okay, can you want to turn the lights on? Okay, you want to do that, thanks. So basically tonight, this is the agenda for the evening. We are going to, okay. This one's, okay. So tonight, we're going to talk about our experiences in the Tijuana camps. We visited 6 camps, and we were there for a short period of time, 3 days, but still, I think we have a pretty good idea of what's happening out there. Of course, there are people who've been there a longer period of time, and there may be some different views, but I think we were able to get a pretty good idea of what's happening out there. Next. So this is to give you a review of the Caravan. They call them the Migrant Caravan. They started October 12th out of Honduras, and they started only 150, and it grew up to, on the top, to one on the left where we visited. And at that time, at the maximums, there were 8,000 people. Right now, because some of the people go in and out, it's estimated there's probably 6,000, but it's not a fixed number. It varies. Next one. So, no, that's not the right. This is no. Did you go back? Oh, it's the wrong slide. What is it wrong? All right. Next slide then. We were there in collaboration with the San Diego Border Dreamers, which is a community organization that supports all the logistics of physicians when they go visit. There are physicians from University of California in Los Angeles, and there is a big contingency from San Diego University of California, which does a lot of the logistics to arrange our visits. So we arranged the visit ahead of time, and there are physicians from the University of Tijuana, singular out Dr. Maria Calderon, which is a wonderful woman, and she is in charge of supervising the part from the Mexican government involvement, which is very limited at this point. But I will single out the California San Diego group because they're being very instrumental in our visit there for 3 days. Next slide. We visited 6 camps. This is the names of the camps: YMCA, Marasunta, Juventud, Salvation, and we visited all of them during those 3 days. It's quite an exhausting journey. We would stay in San Diego overnight and then cross the border early in the morning, and then literally walk or take Ubers around the city and go different places. We would bring bags of medication. We took about 100 pounds of medication which were donated by different places. Fairview, for example, here donated over $500 in medication. There were private donations, and so we are all these things that we distribute to them over the period of 3 days. Next slide. This is our team. We stay in a house near the San Diego border, and those are the bags that we carried every morning back and forth with all the goodies that we're taking for the patients. Next. This is one of the camps we first visited. This is actually a camp for people being deported from the United States. They're Mexican, and there were some Americans. We did our first clinic there over a period of like 4 hours, and we saw some amazing things there, from wounds that haven't been cared for, from addiction. There's a lot of drug trafficking going around in those camps, respiratory infections, terrible eye infections. It was really mind-boggling, and we had some very severe reactions to what we saw. We were very moved by the misery and how these people felt totally rejected. One man came to me and said, "We feel like the garbage of the world." And some of those, this was a very painful experience. This was our first contact. Next slide. And this we set up. We're not showing patients' faces because we're respectful of HIPAA. We're not allowed to show patients. This is the staff disassembling all the stuff, gloves, of course. We were very careful, and the lady in yellow is this wonderful doctor from Mexico who knows the ropes and guided us through. Thanks. This is a street up in Tijuana, and the big green building, it has a San Diego Dreamers border, has a Caracol, which is a clinic there, and they sort of run the show. They have a pharmacy. Next slide. And this is the pharmacy of some of our people, Dr. Fiscus and Terry and Ali, they'll all be speaking to you. And the pharmacy has some supplies, but this is kind of central. So from here we go and take to different places. There are no IV fluids. We don't give IV. There's no emergency treatment. If there's any patient that's really sick, we send them out to the local hospital. And we had occasions that many patients. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I thought that's an echo. Some patients with addiction problems in that camp we saw first, they no one got a hospital because they cold turkey them. They don't help them through the withdrawal program. So we saw a man with a ring in his finger that was dig out to the bone, and Terry, one of our wonderful nurses, cleaned him up, and he finally agreed to go to the hospital, but he said that's his fear. A lot of them are on drugs, and the hospital doesn't have a humane treatment for drug withdrawal. This is the last place we visited, and this is a wonderful refuge that is put by a local church. They have had Haitian immigrants there for a number of years. When there was a big migration of 70,000 Haitians a few years ago, a lot of them are still there, and the pastor there was very gracious, and this is the entrance when we went there. There was tons of patients to see there. There wasn't an examination room. We had to examine them in the church right there where they live. Next. This is the greeting committee where we saw there, and I said, comparing to our CSC, quite a difference. We're having a grand time with these two guys on the mud there. So we had to carry all this. The river there is not all water, if you know what I mean. And sanitation is terrible. I don't know how people survive in this environment, to tell you the truth. Next slide. This is the table was set up, and you see on the back a green tent. That's where they live. There's about probably 500, I would think. And they're inside the church around the altar, and it's cold out there, and they're not used to cool weather like we are. And they will live in those tents, and then they had latrines outside, which once somebody told me that sometimes it would take a week before they clean them up. So there's a terrible sanitation issue which was one of our big concerns about epidemics. Next. So this is some data from them. I acquired this from a wonderful doctor who's actually doing a medical anthropology degree in the University of California at Berkeley. And this is statistics that his group obtained about what is this population consist of. And this was actually a pretty good survey of 1,000 people. And as you see below 18 to 29, that's the age group, about 50% are very young, and the gray are men. So the Caravana consists mostly of young men, undereducated, underemployed, who are running a lot from violence and drug problems in the different Central American countries. And you see very few people over 45, which I think explains why this population is relatively healthy considering the conditions they live. Next. And the age, the scholarity of this group, 0 to 6 years, so they're terribly undereducated, and men and women are on par. Their education median is 6.4 years. Next. This, I won't try to, next slide. But this is the report of 1,000 people who came in the Caravan about their health issue. 33% reported a significant health issue. It was equal for men and female. Respiratory problem was a big thing, and we couldn't precise more. It could be asthma, it could be cardiac, we don't know. This population has not been screened. There was a significant percentage, 5 for a young population, of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. We saw some people with very high blood sugars. We took glucometers and needed insulin, and it's very hard to get it out there, and we couldn't carry with us because insulin has to be refrigerated. And musculoskeletal injuries were significant, as well as other not specified by this survey. Next. So this report that they did on 1,000 subjects had this conclusion: the health participant is a young and healthy population. The main health risk is from the unsanitary conditions and overcrowding. They recommended the proper conditions of hygiene. Food is supplied by some of the local food shelters. Some people donated, and that is how they maintain themselves. The water is put in big tanks for people to pick them up. So the water seems to be sanitary, and the food is marginal. And one guy I saw, he's lost 25 pounds. So people do lose weight, although they don't look malnourished per se. And the big conclusion they had is that there should be a way to integrate the migrants to the existing healthcare system, which is very difficult. They can go to a local hospital, but it's really very tough for the immigrants to get service there. They have to apply under Mexican rule for service, and then it takes a while, so it's really difficult. So most, if not all, the care is being provided by people like us. They're volunteers from all the parts of the world, but I must say we were the only one from the Midwest. This is what we saw in the 200 patients that we serviced over 6 camps. 50% were adults, so 50% were children, so it's a very many families, and there was significant male predominance. It was a huge amount of upper respiratory infection that looked bacterial and viral. We couldn't culture, there's no cultures. Some asthma, we saw chickenpox out open, not isolated. Scabies and lice were predominant in the camp, and we brought some treatment, but few were treated. A lot of diarrhea, but it did not seem to be a very serious form of coliform diarrhea, bacterial diarrhea. Many people with open sores in their legs, some of them from the walking, and those were not being well cared for. They were open in the air, they were infected. Stress headaches and anxiety were very predominant, and I think the mental health group will talk about that. Diabetes without insulin and trauma. The severe sanitary conditions was a big concern for us, and cholera will just need to arrive and it'll find plenty of candidates there because that sanitary condition. There's no laboratory or x-ray facilities at all. There's no vaccination program. We don't know the status of the people as far as vaccination. And diphtheria is a big concern because this is readily transmitted, and we reported cases in some of the Kenya refugee camps, about 2,000 cases of diphtheria. And so the vaccination is a very big concern for us. The limitations of medication were only to one distribution center, and the mental health issues were also a severe part of our findings. Next slide. So now we'll let the other people come and briefly highlight what they saw. We divided our practitioners into two groups, the mental health group and the pediatrics internal medicine group. And they each, sometimes they were separate, sometimes we were together. We set a little table out for them and they did their thing. So I think Roberto is one of our medical students here, a second year, Roberto Lopez. And he and Sarah Leshner, who's a nurse practitioner in child pediatrics, took on this job, and we will have them give a report about what is the mental health situation with the children and adults that you guys looked at and spent some time in. So, who
we visited a women and children's shelter first, and there we found from the reports of the mothers that a lot of the children were facing really high distress and anxiety when they first got to the shelter, to the point where they couldn't even be in a different room than their mother. Luckily, I think through the effort of different medical groups, there's been psychologists that have come before us and have helped the children to be able to feel more comfortable and safer. So by the time we got there, the children were playing and laughing with each other, even though they were in a pretty small courtyard and didn't really have much to their names. When we went to Little Haiti, we saw a lot of cases of anxiety due to uncertainty about people's day-to-day routine, what's going to happen to them when they're going for their asylum interview. A lot of them didn't know, had a lot of stress from not knowing what the legal process was like, what they would be asked. And so we saw a lot of cases of somatization where people didn't realize they had all this stress, but it would come out in the form of headaches or insomnia or things like that.
So there have been some psychologists and psychiatrists who have gone to the shelters, but of course the physical health problems have been a higher priority, so there still is a great need for psychological and mental health support for these people, and for some system to be set up so there's more continuity of care, because as we all know, relationship is the main basis for any kind of psychological support. We took art supplies for the kids, and we also took stuffed animals, and it may seem like a tiny thing, but when a lot of times and there have been some groups that have collected stuffed animals to donate to some of the shelter children, but they tend to collect a lot of the same animal and just hand them out sort of generically. And that's not what kids need. We would have a bag of animals that were all different, and then the child would look and they'd go, nope, not that one. And they would keep picking them up until they found the one that matched them. And that kind of detail is easy to overlook when it's a situation of sort of dire need of respiratory illness and so on and so forth. But to kids it matters so much. All the details and the predictability and the structure that they need so badly. And that's essentially what we were doing, is supporting the parents to understand more ways of providing predictability and structure even in the midst of this terrible chaos, and not knowing when they might actually arrive in the destination that they had set out for so long ago.
Hi, I'm Eileen Crespo. I'm a pediatrician. I work at Hennepin Healthcare, and I also work at Delta Dental, not as a pediatrician. And this was the group that we mostly hung out with, and we visited a number of shelters while we were down in the Tijuana area. I predominantly was at the Women and Children's Shelter, as well as the Little Haiti Shelter. And what I can tell you, I think Dr. Fiol has covered a lot of this already, is that we saw a lot of actually mostly healthy kids, which was great, and those were the patients that I was focusing on. A lot of coughs and colds, but we did see a couple of kids who were a little bit sicker. One who definitely had influenza, one who probably had strep, a lot of skin conditions. I think I already heard him talking about chickenpox, and those were cases that were concerning. Number one, because chickenpox is something we just don't see very much anymore, but it was a very classic case. And the fact that there's just really no way to really isolate these kinds of patients. That young man with chickenpox was in the Women and Children's Shelter where there were newborn infants. So just really high risk for them all to be kind of eating in the same spaces. It was very much a communal atmosphere where lots of people would be holding these babies, like the kids would be passing them around from arm to arm. So those things were concerning to me. The patient that we saw with influenza, we actually ended up giving she was about an 11-year-old girl, and we gave her one of our N95 masks to wear around the shelter because there's just no other way to try to compartmentalize any of the ones who are sick. So that was, hopefully, that really didn't spread, and we were able to start her on treatment right away. We were able to purchase Tamiflu. Tamiflu is hard to find in Tijuana, but we had a very resourceful medical student who somehow found a pharmacy and was able to get some Tamiflu for us. So we were able to start her within 24 hours. So that, I think, makes a difference, certainly for infection control. A couple other things that we did see that I think are interesting. We actually saw 2 children in the same family with a very rare metabolic disorder. And the reason that they were identified was actually all those kids had been born in the United States and had moved to Mexico because their father was deported. And so they had been living in Mexico for the last 3 years, but the mom was actually sending them back to live with family because she was just really unable to get this very specialized medication that these children required. So it was a really, that was a kind of particularly heart-wrenching scenario, only because this mother was walking her children back to the border to send them back to the United States because she couldn't accompany them because she was undocumented. So sending these kids to get the care that they really needed and really were unable to get in Mexico was just something that just pulls at your heartstrings. And knowing that she, they were really uncertain about what would happen to her when her 3 kids were going to be gone in the United States. They were going to go stay with some extended family, but for her to know that she has these 2 children with this rare, very serious metabolic disorder and her not be able to care for them was just particularly bothersome for us. Also in that family, there was an older young lady, 14-year-old, who didn't have this genetic problem, but really was, you could see her really becoming the adult because her mom had basically assigned her to kind of be in charge of these younger siblings. And she spoke with us about her concerns about her mom's health and welfare because she was going to be leaving her mom in an abusive relationship with the father. And she specifically talked about she was basically her mom's protector, but she had to accompany the younger siblings. So there was just some really disturbing scenarios that we ran into, and really not much you could do. I encouraged that young lady to get some counseling for herself once she got settled, because when you're 14, you shouldn't have to be in charge and you shouldn't have to be the adult. But these are unusual circumstances that these patients are in. So, so those were a few things that really kind of stuck with many of us. The other point I wanted to make was that we visited the YMCA shelter for unaccompanied adolescents, and so it was almost like a college dorm. There was a lot of just teenage boys and girls. They keep them separated. And what struck me about those children were Number one, that they were by themselves. They were going to have to present for their asylum interview on their own. Many of them had family in the United States that they were going to try to get to, but it was just, to me, it was just really jarring to think that you would, walk whatever 3 months to get to some location and then just be abandoned. One young man in particular had come with his uncle, and then his uncle, once they got to the border, said, this is too hard, I'm not going to do it, and basically turned around and went back, leaving this, he was about 14 or 15, leaving him to try to negotiate the credible threat interview on his own, and then try to make his way to an uncle in the United States. So just really children who are unbelievably brave and facing really what, to me, the whole process really seemed very intimidating. So those are the things that kind of struck me. Those are the things that kind of stayed with me. Yeah.
We have Dr. Lynn Fiskus from North Carolina, University of North Carolina. She's on the line. She used to be faculty here on a family practice clinic. She jumped at the invitation, and she was just wonderful out there, and she covered internal medicine for adults, although she did everything. She's a big inspiration to us. So we're going to put her on the line, if we can manage it here.
Okay, how's that audio? Can you hear me okay? Is that working? Is our technology working out?
Yeah, go ahead.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thanks. As Dr. Peel said, my name is Lynn Fiskus. I'm a internal medicine and pediatrics trained physician who moved down to North Carolina about 1.5 years ago. Previously was at the University of Minnesota, and I think you can see by the stories already shared by Dr. Peel and Roberto and Sarah and Dr. Crespo, just I think number one, how inspiring they are and the compassion that they brought to the work that they were doing down there. But I think more so the inspiration, courage, and incredible stories that we heard from the individuals that we had the opportunity to care for when we were down there. I think I'll just share a couple of other stories of patient and individual stories because I think it really is telling and hopefully impactful to folks. One child that I was seeing at the Foca de Salvacion shelter, and I've done a fair number of mission trips to resource-poor countries that are, in stable circumstances, and a very common chief complaint from parents is that my child won't eat. Please, is there something you give my child, or to give vitamins or something? They're so skinny. And it's kind of a universal, I think, concern for parents and grandparents for their children. And so when this mother at the shelter brought her 7-year-old to me and said, "Oh, she won't eat," we started talking a little bit about it. And then it shifted a little bit, and it wasn't that she won't eat at all. But it was that my daughter will only eat when she's with me. When she is playing around with the shelter at her friends or they have food available, she just won't eat anything. And then when she's with me, she will eat, and I can get her to eat. And talking to her some more, their father had been separated from them on this journey, and they did not know where he was anymore. And then certainly as they were waiting for their number to be called for their credible threat interview, there is worry that is not unfounded, that is very real, that they might be separated in the process of making their case for asylum for themselves. And so this was, a child who had such fear of separation and separation anxiety that she just would not eat, and had actually lost a little bit of weight according to her mom. And so these families dealing with just these unbelievable circumstances and hearing from them the violence that they had fled that led them to leave in the first place, and talking to this mother who is doing exactly what I would have done with my 7-year-old if I were in those circumstances, trying to find a safe place to live. At that same shelter, another had a couple of young men in their early 20s who came with a chief complaint of headaches, which is not really a very normal complaint in that demographic. And as I was talking to one of the young men, and just asking normal sort of questions about headaches, and asked if there had been any, head trauma, or if he had hit his head. And then he started to recount a number of times where he had been beaten to the point of unconsciousness by the violence from the gangs and the cartels where he was in Honduras, and showed sort of scars and actually a skull deformity on one side from one of the times that it had happened, and just took my breath away seeing him and hearing him, and listening to the violence that he had fled, and what resulting in chronic headaches from chronic multiple head traumas and multiple concussions that had led to this, and again putting myself in his shoes and understanding the incredibly difficult choice that these individuals and families are making to try to not just have a better life for their families. I think that's what sort of struck me. This wasn't about people being poor and not wanting to be poor anymore. These are people who feared on a daily basis for their lives and their safety, and that is why they left. And it was clear talking to them, conversations that started about their medical complaints, but getting into the challenges and daily violence that they were experiencing. We additionally did see, I know we talked a little bit about some of the infectious disease challenges. There was one of the shelters that was experiencing an outbreak of scabies. It's a little bit challenging to treat when there's no shower facilities, and so working with Dr. Crespo to find a pharmacy with some oral medications that we could get out there was a challenge, but certainly these close quarters with people with not particularly hygienic conditions leading to infestations. So I think those were the encounters and interactions with individuals that I think were certainly most impactful for me. I'll say a lot of those young men, even with the headaches and the medical problems that we were addressing, they wanted to work. They were going a little bit stir crazy sitting in these shelters. They wanted to work. They wanted us to try to help them find shoes. There was a young man who asked for a hammer. Frank was hoping in one of those big duffel bags Dr. Field had shown in his photos that maybe we'd have a hammer in there, because he had worked as a carpenter in Honduras and had some things around the church that he thought that he could help fix, and maybe he could do some work to in order to be able to earn a little bit of side money while the family was waiting for their number to be called for the hearing. And I think that really Dr. Field again showed the statistics with the demographics of this population, and I think it's young, healthy, they want to work. There's a lot that they could be contributing both in Mexico and here in America.
Thank you very much, Lynn. There'll be a question and answer session afterwards. Thank you so much for your vignettes. They really demonstrate what. Now we have Ali Panning, one of our medical students here at the U. She came along with us, and she did a wonderful job organizing me at times, because I can be disorganized. My wife is back there, and she knows. So Ali's going to tell us a little bit about her take on this this journey that we all took together. And is there any questions while we wait for it setting up here? Anybody who has questions about some of the issues we have addressed? We're going to have a Q&A session, but just to warm up the audience here. Anybody has any questions about this mission? And we'll have time to, when we look at, yes, Chair Lane, please.
Just an advance notice, it would be really interesting if you talked about the similarities and differences that you three saw in Puerto Rico after the hurricane versus now here in Tijuana.
Thank you very much. Some of us, Charlene, and I have my little flag here to prove. Some of us are Puerto Rican, Elena, and we went, and Roberto went, we went to the Puerto Rico mission, and we did 6 missions to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico had the hurricane, as you remember, September 2017. How could we forget? and 3,000 people died in that hurricane. And there hasn't been much mortality in the Tijuana. I think the mortality in Puerto Rico was more senior citizens, people with chronic diseases. This is a young population, so I think they're more vulnerable to infectious diseases. So there are some differences. In Puerto Rico, our work was going to the homes. Here we were visiting shelters. And there's quite a difference. Homes, neighbors stood with each other and help each other. It was very noticeable. There were families living together in communities. So there are a number of differences that I think there are. But what struck me about Tijuana and where I come from is that Puerto Rico had lots of, help. FEMA came in, and there was a lot of help from everybody. But these people out there are alone. They have some help, but they're just like intruders in a society. And Tijuana society is a violent society. They have a lot of drug problems themselves. So they're in the middle of society and they're isolated. In Puerto Rico, you had openness and you could go out and there was no risk to you. But sometimes we felt threatened. I mean, we were in one place where this man was very psychotic and he kept challenging us, throwing verbal insults to us. So it's a totally different situation in terms of the ambiance where you try to do your medical mission. And I think we must, as a group, we must as people, open up our hearts and say, this does not have to be. These people are fleeing for freedom. Let's embrace them. Let's give them hope. Let's just not isolate them in camps. And we'll get to that at the end. But I think a big difference between... Eileen, you want to say something about Puerto Rico experience?
In Puerto Rico, I think it was very different. But what I was struck with when we traveled to Puerto Rico is we were there to provide medical care, and what we were assaulted with was just tremendous amounts of post-traumatic stress disorder. Every single patient we saw wanted to tell us what they had been through, where they had been, what they had lost, and the needs in Tijuana are a little bit more immediate. I don't think they're feeling as many of the after effects. Of course, the adults have a lot more of the symptoms of stress and somatization, but for the children, for the most part, they were healthy. They just wanted to be kids. You could just see they really just wanted to play. And I did want to mention, I think in Tijuana, one of the shelters we were in, which was run by an order of Carmelite nuns who have been harboring migrants for 25 years, they had a really good idea of how to do it well. It was very organized. They even had like school for the children. They had like a one-room kind of schoolhouse where they had toddlers and teenagers all in the same room working on workbooks and coloring, and just how much those kids crave and respond to order and schedules. In Puerto Rico, when we were there, there wasn't as much of that because people were in their homes. They weren't in an organized shelter. So it's very different. It's not the same situation in so many different ways. So it's hard to relate them exactly, but.
Yeah, so of note in my presentation, a lot of the pictures that I have of people's faces didn't come from us. It came from a story in National Geographic done by a photographer who had traveled with the first caravan when they got to Tijuana. So those are where those pictures come from, because we didn't feel it was appropriate to take photos of our patients. So the first slide, we'll just start. This is kind of a closing because we wanted to share some of the stories, the personal stories that we heard from our trip. In doing so, we hope it brings faces and memories to a topic that sometimes can feel like a really faceless political problem. That's definitely dominated by numbers and statistics a lot. Lately, this is especially true in the media. There are some statements pulled from organizations like CNN, the New York Times, Fox News over the past week, some from the past day. At times, these statements can really misrepresent and dehumanize people by painting a complex problem with too broad of strokes. Soon, the word migrant doesn't really start to feel like the word human anymore, and that's something that we didn't want. So the first stories I was going to tell were about the kids, but I think Dr. Crespo and Dr. Fiskus did really well in telling you stories about kids who maybe didn't have the chance to continue to be kids, but who are really being resilient and looking for that hope to keep going. We also saw a lot of single adults during our visit. In one refuge that we were in, we met a lot of men who were really desperate to work. They literally said to us, "We want to work, but we don't have the shoes." So there's definitely a need for supplies there. On a happier note, I thought this story was definitely worth sharing. There was a different woman who had run out of her diabetes medications on her journey. Our community health worker, Jill, who also has diabetes herself and has a diabetes pump on her, she had measured this woman's blood sugar and found it to be 4 times the normal range, so which is way too high. Jill used some of her own insulin out of her pump to help her get it under control. Afterwards, they came up with a good medication regimen that was feasible for her to do. We were met by so much generosity when we were there too. Anywhere we went, people would come to carry our tables, carry our chairs. There was one woman who we kind of made it. Someone had said, "Oh, I love your handbag," and she immediately tried to empty it out and give it to us. This is a quote from the outside camp from a patient that Dr. Fuel saw that I think really impacted all of us, for someone to kind of feel this way. Sorry. And then finally, a story that hasn't been shared yet, because we saw a lot of families, a lot of family units that were together. So we saw one Honduran family in the church refuge where there was a lot of scabies and things like that going on. And we saw her 13-year-old daughter for an unrelenting cough that wouldn't go away. There we spoke to her father, who had fled Honduras from gang violence. He literally had the scars from machetes on his arms. His wife had been a nurse and she had to leave her career to be able to come. This was just one family of many there who had lost their careers and their homes and their loved ones. Sorry. Because they were running from violence. But their incredible kindness and resilience was really impactful for us to see. Yeah, they truly carry with them determination and a hope for a better future. Finally, these are some pictures from the children at the Madre Asunta shelter, the very well-run shelter. Just to kind of humanize it a little bit more, and these are kids who are, with the right conditions, can really thrive. So at the end of the trip, we were talking, and many of us wondering what more we could do. Now that we knew these people, we knew their stories. So we hoped in sharing it with all of you that you also could become messengers to add more voices to their cause. Because these are very, very human people who we should not let down.
Thanks so much. That was so touching. Well, I want Terry and Jill just a couple of words about their emotional reaction. Terry here was a great hugger of people, and she made us humanize people more than we already were. So, Terry, you want to tell us, surely?
The first camp that I went to was even in an Uber cab. I was with Roberto, and the cab driver kind of referred to them as, I guess you would, kind of like the lepers of society as we drove by, and that was the very first camp that I was at. And what impacted me the most is that these were people who were probably never going to get across the border due to their drug addiction, heroin, meth, HIV, and I claimed myself the self-imposed wound care nurse because I loved it very dearly, and what struck me was a man who told me he had these wounds, and they were, I mean, they were so bad. They were here and here and here, and they wouldn't clean them the night before. He was in jail, so he had just gotten out of jail, but it didn't matter to me. And humanizing him by doing that, and I needed to spend some time softening all the dead skin on the top, thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? So I asked him what his favorite song was, and he said Whitney Houston. So I was really quite surprised that this young man who just got out of jail was loving Whitney Houston. And he broke out in his version of I Will Always Love You. And so I said, all right, every time it starts to hurt, let's just sing. And I'm not a good singer. So, and then the verse where she does her la 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 la, but it was, I will always love you. And then he would go, and then before you know it, his friends are doing the same runs, and then I'm doing it, and then everybody else is doing it, and it really just became a song of joy for me. I sent a couple of these guys that version of it tonight, but for me, when I hugged him when he left, which I did all of our wound care patients, because they needed it. And he cried, and he cried. And what really struck me the most about this group is that we didn't know what we were going to walk into, and we just had to be innovative with what we had. We had what we had, and that's what we had to work with. And I was really proud to be a part of this team that was really able to be so creative in finding solutions to problems. And also, I would love for you to share your story about the cards.
Yeah, I would like to thank this amazing group of people. I think we all have unique talents, and when we brought them together, we were a really extraordinary group. There were a lot of things I think we did that maybe were going above and beyond, which I think says a lot about the character of these team members. One thing would be on our last day, we were kind of dropping supplies and doing some follow-up. And Sarah, Roberto, Ali, and myself went back to the little Haiti shelter, which is where you saw the pigs. It had been raining very, very hard for about a day at that point. The shelter is at the very end of a dirt road that even cabs would not drive down. And after the rain, it was completely flooded, just rushing water coming through where there was a lot of fecal matter from the animals. And we were determined, though, to get this medication back to treat these kids and others who had scabies. And we kind of did some, it's not swimming, but we walked through some very deep water that was probably really gross. And we all had really wet feet. And looking back, it kind of seems like extreme, but it was like no question in the moment. Like we knew we all had to do it for our own peace of mind. And we made this little mission. It turned out to be kind of fun. And we were greeted with smiles and offered food immediately, which was also really sweet. These people, for having so little, they were always willing to give you whatever it is you wanted, whether it be food or their bootleg Dooney and Burke bag that I really liked. They were offering up everything all the time. It was really wonderful.
Okay, so I want just to give some concluding statements, and then we're going to open it up after Sherry Lynn would give us some about the Minnesota Solidarity Coalition. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question about concern about what was the level or what is the level of organization of the people there, the refugee camp. How are they organized there? They are organizing very well, and then also the level of nutrition they are receiving. Concern me. Also, the mother that are giving birth and people with diseases that came from Honduras. And you know, if you guys saw any other local Mexican doctor working with them, how is the attention, and also any United Nations or other international group assisting the people there, counseling. But it's important to know about the nutrition and the level of organization that people is having there.
Okay, that's a very good question, Marcial. Marcial is from Honduras. He knows the situation to his heart. You've been in concentration or refugee camps before, so I think we'll hold the question, Marcial, do you mind, to the end a little bit so we conclude, and then we'll take all the things. So the next, can you put the slides on? So we wanted to make some conclusions because we experienced this, but the experience will be gone. What are we going to do about it? Action, action, action. So what are we concluding here? That the healthcare delivery is done, Marcial, your question, overwork, very noble, few Mexican government staff, a lot of NGOs and local volunteers. They're all struggling to provide very basic treatment. And the treatment is provided is unsatisfactory by most of our standards. There's little surveillance for serious infection, no culture. Mental health issues are increasing and concerning. No ancillary tests are available. Vaccination status unknown. Medication supply is scarce. Overcrowding, sanitary problems are a big problem. And this is the big problem. The arrival of new immigrants. The Caravan is putting together in Honduras and Central America, supposed to be 15,000. I cannot see how any portion of that caravan can arrive to Tijuana and be safe there. It's totally beyond what the system can give them. So we must somehow deal with the caravan before it gets there, because it's going to be a chaos in Tijuana if all these people come there. Somehow, somewhere, something has to be done to create an environment that maybe divide the caravan, I don't know. But Tijuana cannot take 15,000 people. It is incredulous that this is happening. Next slide. This a recommendation from Dr. Fiskus, which I thought very good. We need to increase the capacity to process asylum application, and that will be putting more judges in the immigration process. Allow temporary work visa for these migrants who can help with jobs that are unfilled at this time of low unemployment. Invest in aid to Central America to combat violence and grow their economies, to improve the conditions which are leading this family to free the homeland. And then finally, I think a big thing that I alluded to is to create a central group, a central board of the medical staff in Tijuana to come together and perhaps create a medical sanctuary where we can put patients with all kinds of diseases before they infect others. We can take care of supply, and it doesn't have to supply so many different little centers. So something of the people coming together in Tijuana with all the NGOs, with the University of San Diego, and all these people, and create some sort of a sanctuary where we could deal with this. I think I wanted to leave this message for I think that the scenario there is a ticking bomb. I want to make that real clear. If these immigrants make it there, there's going to be a huge amount of epidemics, probably cholera, other things I don't want to say, but this is a ticking bomb scenario. And that's why the urgency of this meeting to report what we saw out there. This could turn out to be a disaster zone if more immigrants are put into a system which is barely surviving to produce. Many wonderful people helping, but it's so overwhelming. Next slide. And finally, we bear witness to the plight of this refugee and reaffirm that these are real families who are not less human than us. They have lost career, homes, loved ones, and at times their dreams after they were forced out of their home countries by violence. The migrants themselves are resilient, resourceful, and kind beyond measures, as many have said. Must feel forgotten by the world after a solid travel, and we cannot let them down. Thank you very much. Before we open it to question, I want to share a link from the Minnesota Caravan Solidarity to say a couple of words about what the coalition is doing. We are part of the coalition. Shirlene, it's been wonderful, helpful with the Minnesota Caravan Solidarity Group and supporting us through the process of preparation. And the issue of health is part of a universe of issues, and I think Shirlene, nobody better than her to tell us briefly what the coalition is doing to address all other issues, which are very germane.
Thank you very much. The group that Dr. Fiola is referring to is just a loose group of activists and organizations who support Caravan members as human beings just like us, as a part of a political and social system that's not working and that actually is violating their rights. We call ourselves Minnesota Caravan Solidarity, and our goal is to galvanize people in the local area here in Minnesota, the Twin Cities especially is where we're located, to demand change. Our work is supported and endorsed by these individuals and diverse groups in immigrant rights, peace, solidarity, political and civil rights movements, and communities of faith. We denounce the human rights abuses that are happening at the border, and we believe in keeping families together. These are some of the basic principles that we can all agree on, whether we're fighting local concerns, national concerns, international concerns. I have a flyer that's going around that is just some suggestions about if you are sitting here and you don't know what to do. It's a complex issue, and there's some suggestions of what you can do on this flyer. I want to just take a moment to say that this is really a health-oriented discussion, and I know that's very important to you especially, but there's a piece of it that can't go unmentioned, and that is the conditions in the countries that people are fleeing. Why are they fleeing? Like, who would just like walk out the door of their house with a backpack and their kids and just start walking to a different country? Like, who does that? And why? It's a very serious situation, and I want to kind of answer that question and ask Anne, who wrote a very interesting, informative kind of poem or essay, to just give you a little bit about the history and the conditions, in particular in Honduras and other Central American countries have a very similar strain of historical and current conditions. And with that, I'll let Anne do that.
Thank you, Sherilyn. We love poetry, so it would be very good.
You ask why they come, walking to our border from Honduras and other parts of Central America. The people of Honduras reversed the question, going back 150 years. Why did you come in the 1850s with your horses and lances across Mexico to claim Honduras as your own? Why did you come in the 1890s with your gunboats and banana companies, your railroads and banks, to turn our sovereign land into your plantation? Why did you send in your Marines countless times from 1900 to 1932 to cut down our freedom fighters? Why did you occupy our countries every time we asserted our rights to sovereignty? Why, in the era of your good neighbor policy, in the 30s and the 40s, did you prop up our surrogate dictators in our nations, your surrogate dictators, fund our national guards, train them in torture tactics, all the while calling yourself a friendly neighbor? Why, when we organized to fight your banana companies in the 1950s and elected people who would institute land reform, did you come in with your CIA and your helicopters and your coups, covert only to your own people? Why, in the 1980s, when the people overthrew your dictators and organized revolutionary forces, did you turn Honduras into your own private military base, telling your own people you were fighting Soviet satellites, not indigenous struggles for freedom? Why did you set up your missiles and helicopters and mercenaries while our children starved? Why, in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell, did you invade with your free trade, quote unquote, attack with your drug war, quote unquote, decimating our local economies for your corporate profits? In 2007, when we elected someone who reflected our demands for wealth redistribution, why did you support his ouster? For the last 11 years, you coddled a corrupt and deadly regime in Honduras who protects mining companies and denies the basic needs of the Honduran people. For the last 180 years, you've robbed our nation of its resources and its sovereignty until there was nothing left. Then you ask, why do they come?
Thank you very much, Anne. A lot of food for thought. So I think now we'll open it to the audience participation. And I'm going to pass the microphone to anybody who wants to.
Did you, or anyone in the group, feel any, when you were there, if there was any apathy or friction between the native Mexicans there and the Hondurans? I mean, the biggest irony of this whole thing is that the native Mexican in Tijuana have very little or hardly any access to healthcare themselves. So I'm just wondering if you felt there was some kind of apathy, or anyone in the group, or friction between them and the Hondurans there. Which, by the way, there was not only Hondurans, but there was other people from other Central American countries, correct?
I guess I'm going to say no. I don't think we saw any of that. Do we agree with that sentiment? Yeah. And there were, so if, for example, in the Little Haiti, there was a man who lived in a house down the road. I don't know if he was a member at the church there or if he saw us coming. He came and brought his newborn baby, I think that was 2 weeks old, to be evaluated by us. So I mean, I guess he was, capitalizing on us being there. And I think other people in the community too were taking advantage of these resources. And I think, unbeknownst to us, there were probably people we saw who actually lived there. And at Enclave Caracol, which is kind of where the headquarters was, from my understanding, that's a resource that anyone can use. You don't necessarily need to be a Honduran migrant. They offered a variety of services, I think, that were accessible to everyone. But you're correct in stating that the healthcare system in Tijuana, for even people who live there, are really bad. We heard from some of the med students from UC San Diego that, you might go to the emergency room for something and you may sit there and wait for days to be seen. I mean, Mexico in general, they're capitalizing on sort of the plastic surgery type of thing. They're kind of in it for monetary, people from the United States coming there to get operations. But as far as healthcare for their own people, yeah, it's not great.
This is a good question. Any other questions?
Earlier, I don't know if they're still here or not, but there were members of the media here. If you could have their ear for a moment, what stories would you suggest to them to tell to better communicate what's going on? Or are there ways of telling stories that you would have recommendations for them to better communicate what's happening?
Actually, we found when we were down in Mexico that they don't want the press there. And there was this caracol that you referred to, and there was a sign, no press, no politicians. And they're leery of the press. I think the sense is that the press doesn't really represent their plight and their issues. And the press that we had today here, which is going to be at 10 o'clock news, Care 11, we try to make it real clear what we talk about, this imminent danger situation out there to humanize the people. And we talk clearly, we didn't see any of this rapists and killers and all that the press is putting through. So I don't know, maybe you know or somebody else know the answers, how to impact the press, but it's possible that the press swings because of its own interest and they're not telling the truth. And I think that's an issue that will take us to a debate here for a while. So anybody wants to give some ideas about the press reaction to this crisis, you guys? Very good question. Sherilyn?
The press supposedly just passes through what you say to them. So I think your statements are very powerful so that they actually get truth from on the ground, not just what people are thinking and that haven't been there.
Hopefully. Any other question? Juan?
Well, I think probably because on the internet, I love listening to the people, and it has the joy and the freedom of America. And
say it.
I was helped by the Episcopal Church, and they let me live. I lived with a family that he was a doctor, a very nice person, and he was very involved in human rights, including protecting the blacks in America. And I listened to this, and I saw my life was difficult when I first came. It was a piece of cake. I really had almost tears in my eyes when you said what these people are suffering. And there's no hope for them because the governments are controlled by upper class people that don't care about the people below them. And that has to change, but otherwise we're going to face more revolutions, more dictators, and more crisis in Central America. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for the poem because it explains a lot about the history in several Central American countries. And I have a question regarding the immigrants or the migrants that are in Tijuana. Do you know if they are mostly from the cities or from the rural areas? Because when you say that they're fleeing gangs, we tend to associate gangs with more with cities. So maybe the situation in Honduras is different. I don't know. I would like to get some understanding. When they're fleeing, are they fleeing gangs organized in the cities, or what is happening in Honduras? It seems that most of the people that are migrating are from Honduras. Is that correct? And so, can you explain a little, if anyone knows? I'm sure there are some articles here that I'm going to read in this page to understand more what is the situation in Honduras. Thank you.
Well, the situation in Honduras is a combination of different things. Some are economicals, first of all, and then corruption in the government, collusion with the organized crime and gangs, which run the drug business for the government, police, and then the lack of opportunities for people, unemployment, and a lot of violence. And this is a combination of things, but the worst thing is the violence in the street, and that come to the family. You know, there is a lot of people there have a family have been killed on the street by gangs or by the police, even by the repression of the government. And this is a situation that combined with lack of opportunities, no job, people barely eat there. Sometimes they struggle to probably to have a one plate for one day, you know, maybe eat one time a day. And that is real. It's not an invention, it's real. There's a lot of people there. That's what I asked Dr. Phil what they find out that about the nutrition, but they come from there very in bad shape, you know. They might be surviving, asking for money or asking for food, but the situation in Honduras is really, really complicated. And then nobody cares, you know. It's people accustomed to see violence, they become insensitive, you know. They don't care, you know. But I think they care because now they come in a well organized, you know, in a big group in this caravan. It's a common sense to survive. And I say this is the real problem. It's not only in Honduras. There are people from El Salvador and from Guatemala who are adding to this caravan, but the mainly problem is in Honduras because the situation that everybody knows, situation that of dictator, very brutal, with using the army and the police to repress the people, and the situation, economical situation, is really, really bad there. The whole country is totally destroyed, and then that's the real reason.
I think we also saw a lot of women who were fleeing domestic violence. I think that also happens in the country where we saw a lot of women with children who were fleeing domestic violence, and I think that also can be a result of the deteriorating conditions in the country, that the violence trickles down. So that was another issue.
When you talk about the nutrition, it really varied from camp to camp. At the church, they had things very well organized. I also did visit the YMCA where they had amazing, very well-run organization, and they actually offered us a tour of the rooms where the kids would sleep in, and they were cleaner than my kids' rooms were when they were teenagers. And so they all had jobs that they were expected to do there. They had be my servant. No, it was they had dance classes, they were doing physics, and they all had jobs there. They were getting an education, and these were the unaccompanied minors. I mean, these were really the unaccompanied minors, and they were the most well-behaved, gracious young men and women that we met. And the gentleman who ran the program was teaching them about discipline, about honor, he was teaching them how to run a business based on chiclets, and using whatever he could to help them learn of what they can do when they went over here. That's one example. The other example is that the camp that we were at, where we stayed until it got very dark and there were no lights, and we held the flashlights up, and Lynn talked about the child who couldn't eat, and she was trying to help give her some ideas on nutritional things that she could offer her child to help her with her nutrition. And she said, have her try to drink more milk. And her response was, we don't have any milk. And the same with the men who wanted to go out and work. What they asked for besides a hammer and some shoes is if there's some way we could maybe just provide them an extra sandwich so that they could have some lunch, so that they could keep working throughout the day. So it really did vary from camp to camp.
Two things. One is, I would say that the other thing we didn't see there was childhood obesity. None of those kids were overweight. Really and truly, every single kid was pretty average or kind of a little bit undernourished. So the only obese kid I saw during the days that we were there was at the border before we went across. He was an American kid going across. And then this woman here asked if we were asking where in Honduras they were from. We didn't ask them where they were from. The intake sheets and some of the places where we worked had kind of country of origin, and so most of them were Honduras, but there were people from El Salvador, but we didn't specifically ask like where in Honduras you're from. And really and truly, we weren't really there to interrogate them about who they were and why they were coming and what was their credible threat. We didn't do that. We were just like, what is your problem today? You know, how can I help you today, basically. So I don't have a lot of details to fill in about exactly where they were coming from.
I've read that there's a significant number of indigenous folk, that village type small areas where they are primarily Mayan or whatever the particular indigenous folks are, and some don't. Did you encounter anyone that didn't speak Spanish? I had heard that was an issue.
Personally, at the Little Haiti shelter, they weren't indigenous, but they were from Haiti, so they spoke Portuguese or French or Creole. So that was a little difficult, but.
Madre Asunta, which was the Carmelite nun-run organization, there were a number of women there who did not speak Spanish and spoke some dialect that I couldn't understand. So, but the nuns could communicate with them. I think again that organization has been there for 25 years, and so they were able to communicate in a variety of dialects more than I could, for sure.
We had one lady who had been deported who only spoke English.
But one thing I have learned in my travels is that we have to ask that question. Who's benefiting from this? And is it the mining? Is it the multinationals? Is it because they're destroying their way of life where these peasants live and they're digging mines, looking for minerals that are scarce for cell phones, for example, or other type of modern commercial interest. So that would be a good thing to try to find out what the root of the problem is, because I think people don't choose to live in poverty. And we know that the politicians are corrupt, but I still think that there is some multinational companies that are fueling all this poverty.
Okay, so there are no further questions. We're closing. One thing that I want to say, I forgot to say, is that we are in conversation with the Global Health Center here at the university to try if we can establish a relationship with University of California in San Diego. So there could be a stream of our faculty and our students, our great students here, and others that can go there on a regular basis to offer help to the population. And I think that we are taking steps from our side to deal with the health issue, but I understand that this is the fever, the health problem, that the infection is way deeper on, and that's a very complicated, very difficult question. And the other thing I wanted to say is, anybody in the audience who wants to be part of the medical mission effort, which is going to continue, I think all of us feel that we can't turn our backs to these people. It was very obvious that they have no voice, that we represented a little voice to the world that you know. And so in that sense, we were committed to continue to some degree a relationship, I'm not sure what, But if people are interested in the audience to be part of the Medical Mission Network, it doesn't necessarily mean you going there, but helping us do all kinds of things to establish a relationship with the Global Health Center, perhaps. Dr. Howard, who's director, was going to be here tonight, unfortunately she couldn't come. And so those things are happening as the process continues. And so anybody who wants to sign up, please give me your names or come over and we'll sign you up with your information. And thanks. Shirley?
I don't mean to take the last word, but I will, since I can. This project is being paid for by the volunteers themselves who are donating their time. They're donating their expertise and then whatever they bring along with them. In addition to that, there's a GoFundMe site that's set up so individual donors contribute, and as of today, people have contributed $4,675. And so that will be used to reimburse for transportation expenses, starting with the medical students first, then on up in rank as the pay grade goes up. But also the Interfaith Coalition on Migration donated $150 to this project, and including $500 from Fairview Health Services and a few other organizations that have yet to make a contribution. So the last word is to thank you for being part of that group. I'm assuming some of you were, and to thank them for giving their time and expertise.
So anybody who wants to be part of the Continuum mission is going to continue. I don't know how, but in what capacity. Right now we're just trying to catch up on our sleep. So thanks so much for coming tonight. It was fun.